So you're there in 2 Chronicles chapter 14, and we are continuing our study through the kings, and we're just getting started really with the kings of Judah. So we did Rehoboam, and then we did Abijah. So if you remember, Rehoboam reigned for 17 years, and then Abijah only reigned for 3 years. But it was an interesting story with Abijah. Even though he only reigned for 3 years, there was definitely a cool story with him. But Asa reigns for 41 years, so he's got a big chunk here. And Asa is a really good king. And so with these kings, it seems like every really good king has some fault that's brought up. There's something that they do, and it's usually at the end of their reign, they just fall off the wagon for some reason. It happens with Asa, it happens with Josiah, and those are like two of the big kings. It happens with Hezekiah, and just things that they're really good kings, but then at the end of their reign, they just can't finish off their life without doing something stupid or messing up somehow. But let's go to 1 Kings chapter 15, because there is stuff said about Asa in 1 Kings. But most of the stuff, actually, chapter 14, 15, and 16 is all about Asa in 2 Chronicles. So they're not super long chapters, but they are chapters that are just dedicated to things about Asa. And we see in 1 Kings things that are brought up about him more on the negative side, and that's usually the way it goes in Kings, is you see more of the negative side of them, and then Chronicles usually gives the good side and the unseen side to these kings. But so I want to get into the 1 Kings first of all. In 1 Kings verse 15, 1 Kings chapter 15 verse 9, it says, "And in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah. And 41 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. And he took away the Sodomites out of the land, and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. And also Maacah his mother, even her he removed from being queen, because she had made an idol in a grove, and Asa destroyed her idol and burnt it by the brook Kidron. But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all his days." Now, some interesting information here. First of all, Maacah is Rehoboam's wife. Okay? So that would make this his grandmother. So sometimes in the Bible it'll say father, but it's talking about a grandfather. It'll say mother, it'll be talking about a grandmother. So it's still true it's his mother, but it's obviously grandmother, right? And so we see that he removes her from being queen. He takes out the Sodomites. Now that's not mentioned in the Chronicles, but that's one thing that's brought up here, is that he takes the Sodomites out of the land, and that's something that his father or his grandfather Rehoboam didn't do. Okay, go back to 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 22, dealing with Rehoboam. Because it makes a point to say that the Sodomites are there in Rehoboam's day. And if you think about it, Abijah only reigned for 3 years, so there's not that big of a space between Rehoboam and Asa, right? It's kind of this short little 3-year period between those two reigns anyway. So you can almost look at Asa as being like coming in right after Rehoboam anyway. But that also has to do with how old Rehoboam was. 41 years old when he began to reign, so he was already a little older when he started. He didn't start as a kid or anything like that. And so, but anyway, so going into this in verse 22, so 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 22, it says, "And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins, which they had committed above all that their fathers had done. For they also built them high places and images and groves on every high hill and under every green tree. And there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations, which the Lord cast out before the children of Israel." So notice that the Sodomites are mentioned here, and if you look back into the law as far as Leviticus, when it talks about sodomy, and it talks about men with men and all that stuff, it talks about how it pollutes the land and how they did all these abominations. And it goes through a list of all kinds of things, not just sodomy, but like bestiality, incest, all these different things, murder, all these different things that are going on, and how it pollutes the land. And during Rehoboam's reign, he didn't do anything about it. They built these high places, they allowed the Sodomites to be in the land. Well, Asa steps up and just gets rid of the Sodomites. And then Jehoshaphat, his son, spoiler, he gets rid of the rest of them, right? It's like Asa he missed a couple, and he gets rid of them. Then fast forward hundreds of years, you get to Josiah, and he breaks down the Sodomites' houses, like houses that Sodomites lived in that were near the house of God. So you can kind of see this progression as far as they're like, all right, we got them out of the land, we got every last one of them out of the land, and by the way, we're going to rip down their houses and get that out of our face, So, Asa's, obviously a righteous king. And notice that it says he did right in the eyes of the Lord in chapter 15 and verse 11, and he took away the Sodomites out of the land. Okay, so it's not like, well, he did right in the sight of the Lord, but he took the Sodomites out of the land. That displeased the Lord, No. That'd be ridiculous to say anything like that. But all that to say is that there's something interesting here, though, when I was studying through this, is that notice in Rehoboam's day, they built these high places. Well, when we were reading 2 Chronicles 14, it looked like he got rid of all the high places. Well, in 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 14, it says, but the high places were not removed. So that's interesting. Go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 14. And this is just my thought process on this, because this is, like I said, when you look at those so-called contradictions, you got to look at every word, right? Now, there's a couple thoughts with this. It could be the fact that, well, at that time, he didn't take away the high places, but eventually he did. Because we're going to see that there comes a point, he's going to have rest for 10 years, and then he's going to make this covenant, basically that they're going to follow the Lord. So it could be that before that he didn't take away the high places, but then he makes this covenant to where he's like, all right, now we're getting serious about it. We're getting rid of everything, right? And that's when he got rid of all the high places. So it could be just a matter of like when in his reign did he get rid of the high places? Or it could be the fact that it's specifically telling us that he got rid of the high places in the cities of Judah. But there was also Benjamin that was a part of that kingdom, and it could be stating like, okay, Benjamin still had high places in it though. He took care of Judah, but he didn't get rid of Benjamin. So there's a couple ways to look at this. But if you look at 2 Chronicles chapter 14 and verse 1, it says, so Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa, his son, reigned in his stead. And in his days the land was quiet 10 years. And Asa did that which was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God, for he took away the altars of the strange gods in the high places, and brake down the images and cut down the groves. So notice he's taking away the high places, and commanded Judah to seek the Lord, God of their fathers, and to do the law and the commandment. And also he took away out of all the cities of Judah the high places and the images, and the kingdom was quiet before him. And he built fenced cities in Judah, for the land had rest, and he had no war in those years, because the Lord had given him rest. So it could be that, basically before this is when he had the high places, and then he made this covenant, and he basically said, okay, we're going to get serious about this, and all that. So there's different ways to look at that. But to me, I side towards that basically at the beginning of his reign, he got the Sodomites out, but he left the high places there. But then, eventually he decided, okay, it's time to get rid of all these high places everywhere. Or you could just say, well, it was just in Judah that he got rid of them, but in Benjamin maybe they didn't, or something like that. So, but I tend to believe that he eventually just got rid of all of them. Okay, so he had rest for 10 years, and then there's this Zerah, the Ethiopian, that comes out to meet him. And in verse 9, we're going to see that. Verse 9, it says, and there came out against them Zerah, the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,000 and 300 chariots, and came unto Marisha. Now, what's 1,000? 1,000,000. Okay? So that's why when you're in Revelation, when it says there's an army of 200,000, what is that? 200 million. Okay, so you just look at it as 1,000 times 1,000. You just add the zeros together. Okay, that's the easy way of doing it. Just put all the zeros together and then put the 1 in front of it. And there you go. But you had 1,300,000 chariots. Okay, so that's a huge army. Now their army, because before that it numbers Judah's forces and Benjamin's. That's why I was saying that there might be a split there with the high places, because it is splitting up Benjamin as Judah as being like these two forces that are a part of that southern kingdom. But Benjamin, Judah had 300,000, and Benjamin had 280. Okay, so they pretty much had about the same, but basically 580,000. So they had a force, but, I mean, that's almost half. Not quite, but it's almost half the forces of Zerah. And so you can definitely see this. It's kind of like the Abijah thing, if you think about it, right? Abijah had Jeroboam coming against him. How much did Jeroboam have? Jeroboam had 800,000 men, and Abijah had 400,000. So it's kind of like history repeating itself, where you have this force that's almost double you coming at you. And so in this case, it's the Ethiopian. It's a foreign invader. But this is where Asa is going to trust in the Lord. So we kind of see Asa's salt here. Now, he already had decided, and it says he was perfect before the Lord, like David, his father. So he's already set it in his heart. He's going to seek the Lord and all this. But we really see where it hits the road here, or where it really matters, is where he's going to trust in the Lord. In verse 10 there, it says, Then Asa went out against him, and they set the battle in array in the valley of Zephathah and at Mareshah. And Asa cried unto the Lord his God and said, Lord, it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on thee. And in thy name we go against this multitude, O Lord. Thou art our God. Let not man prevail against thee. So this is a great passage. And this phrase here, as far as it is nothing with thee to help, with whether with many or with them that have no power. Now, a phrase like this has been mentioned before. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 14. 1 Samuel chapter 14. Now, is this not the truth when you look throughout the whole Testament, or just in the New Testament too, that how God has done great things with a few number of people? And so this idea of, well, we don't have a lot of people, or how are we going to do anything against this great multitude? That is, pardon the expression, but that's God's bread and butter right there. Meaning that's what he does. And that's what he's saying here, is that it is nothing with thee to help, whether with many or with them that have no power. But you know what? It actually is more so on the side that I believe God would rather work with them that have no power, with them that are a few numbers, because he gets the glory for it. Because in Gideon's case, that was the whole reason. Because Gideon had more people than 300. But God had them he sent them home. Said, that's too many, because you'll think that maybe we did it on our own. But when he had 300 people against 1,000,000, no one's going to say, we did it on our own. It was just because we're that good, right? You had to know at that point that it was God that did it. But this is, in 1 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 6, this is Jonathan. So another great Bible character. But Jonathan uses the same language, but this is the one I usually think of, honestly, when I think of this phrase, is what Jonathan says here. It says in verse 6, it says, And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. And so that is as true as the day is long, that God can deliver no matter how many you're going against or how many you have on your side. Because God can deliver you out of that, and you just need to trust in him. And Asa knew that, and he's crying unto the Lord, and we said, I know that you can help, whether with many or with them that have no power. And that's kind of like, he's kind of just expressing what it means to have few, meaning that you don't have power. You're powerless. But that's where the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. It talks about how 10,000 shall flee at 100 of you, right? One man shall flee, or 1,000 men shall flee at one man, it talks about. And talking about the righteous compared to the wicked, and when God is on your side, that's the number you should be dealing with. Kind of 1 to 1,000, right? And so I just think of Jonathan here, and just think of how Asa just is trusting in the Lord. And notice that it doesn't say we trust in thee, it says we rest on thee. And so that's just kind of another way that you're just basically resting on him. And isn't that like salvation when it comes to getting saved? You're just resting on the Lord. You're just kind of just falling into his arms. Leaning on the everlasting arms, if you will, to bring you through, when it comes to getting saved, to go to heaven, when it comes to just life. But when the forces are against you, you just need to rest on him, because it's time for him to work. It's time for him to do it. And isn't that what Jonathan says? It says, it may be that the Lord will work for us. And he knows that it doesn't matter what the number is. So that's what we need to be thinking about. But going on with verse 12 there, in 2 Chronicles chapter 14 that God obviously delivers him out of the hand of this Ethiopian. It says, "So the Lord smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. And Asa and the people that were with him pursued them unto Gerar, and the Ethiopians were overthrown, that they could not recover themselves, for they were destroyed before the Lord and before his host, and they carried away very much spoil. And they smote all the cities round about Gerar, for the fear of the Lord came upon them, and they spoiled all the cities, for there was exceeding much spoil in them. They smote also the tents of cattle, and carried away sheep and camels in abundance, and returned to Jerusalem." So not only did God deliver them out of their hand, meaning that he saved them from this, but he also made them rich and got all the spoil with it. And so just kind of a double, you kind of think of the double cure, so to speak, saving us from wrath, making us pure, but also just the fact of saving us from hell, but also we get rewards in heaven for the work that we do for him. And just all that goes into serving the Lord, and that it'd be enough if he just saved us from hell, wouldn't it? That would be enough. But God is obviously above and beyond gracious to us and gives us more than we can ever even think of. But going on from there, so go to 2 Chronicles chapter 15. So at this point, Asa is a really good king, right? He's, getting rid of all the high places. He's trusting in the Lord. And notice that they have rest. They have rest from their enemies when people trust in the Lord. But it doesn't mean that there's never going to be a battle, right? Because it doesn't say like Asa did, because most of the time, let's just be honest, most of the time when you're reading through here, the king messes up and then God brings a battle upon them, right? Isn't that what happened with Solomon? Solomon had peace, and then he delved into all those stupid, strange gods because of his wives, to where God's like, all right, well, now you're going to have war. And the same thing with every king. It seems like, well, they mess up, they don't follow God, they're in prosperity, and then God's like, all right, you're not going to have peace anymore, time to go to war. But in this case, he just had rest, and he was following the Lord. So just because you're following the Lord doesn't mean you're not going to have some battles here and there. But notice the difference in the battles. They didn't get decimated. They completely destroyed their enemy, and they were made rich by it. But that comes with trusting in the Lord. And listen, it's not trusting. You ever hear this, it's not brave to beat up someone you can beat up. When it comes to, like, if you're in a fight and you're like, I know I can destroy that person. That doesn't take any type of courage at that point. The courage is when you're going up against somebody and be thinking, that person could probably take me out, but I'm still going to have to fight him. I still got to go for it, right? That's real courage, is when you don't think you could actually win, but you're going to do it anyway. Okay, and that's when it comes down to trusting in the Lord. It's easy when it's, you just know that I can beat this battle. But let's just face it, most of the time when you're dealing with persecution as God's people, you're against the world. The world is against you, and you're always the minority. So it's always going to feel that way. It's always going to feel this matter of like 1,000,000 against one, or like it's 2-1 against you, and it's always going to feel that way. But that's when you need to trust in the Lord. And so, but in 2 Chronicles chapter 15, there's going to be a prophecy that's given to Asa. And it's basically, most of the time, like I said, when you're dealing with this stuff, it's usually like they did something wrong and then the prophet has to come and rebuke them, right? And this is like one of those cases where it's not that way. Like the prophet comes to tell them something good. Now, at the end of Asa's life, we're going to find that happens. He's going to have a rebuke, and he doesn't take it well. But in this case, it's more so the prophet comes to him and just kind of giving him a proposition, saying, listen, if you'll follow the Lord and do this. And so let's see what the prophet says here. It says in verse 1 there, it says, "And the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, the son of Oded. And he went out to meet Asa, and said unto him, Hear ye me, Asa, and all Judah, and Benjamin. The Lord is with you. While ye be with him, and if ye seek him, he will be found of you. But if ye forsake him, he will forsake you. Now for a long season Israel hath been without the true God, and without a teaching priest, and without law. But when they in their trouble did turn unto the Lord God of Israel, and sought him, he was found of them. And in those days, in those times, there was no peace to him that went out, nor to him that came in, but great vexations were upon all the inhabitants of the countries, and nation was destroyed of nation, and city of city, for God did vex them with all adversity. Be ye strong, therefore, and let not your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. So it's almost like a exhortation of like, keep doing what you're doing, and just remember this, that when the children of Israel were without the true God and they were going after these other gods, that God vexed them for it. So it's kind of like this reminder. It's kind of like a cautionary sermon prophecy that he's giving to them, because Asa is not being rebuked here. He's just basically saying, listen, be strong. Let not your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. This is usually not the sermon you get in the Bible, right? This is kind of an anomaly when it comes to when we're reading through it, especially since we went through all the kings of Israel, and they're all bad. And Jehu, you're like, oh, okay, finally, someone to hold on to. Nope. He ends up not being that good in the end anyway. I mean, he was okay, right? But he still did evil on the side of the Lord to a certain extent. But then you get into this, and you're like, okay, here's a king that is doing right, and a prophet's coming to him, and he's just kind of saying, just keep doing what you're doing, but remember that if you do this, this is what happened to them. And I believe what he's saying here, because you can look at this and be like, well, is he talking about the northern kingdom? They're without the true God. I believe this is like basically a perpetual thing that had been going on since the beginning of Israel's, inception, right? Meaning that if you look at the book of Judges, it's just this revolving door of them being in captivity and them being delivered. Captivity, delivered. Captivity, delivered. Captivity, delivered. And it's just over and over again that they get delivered, then they get fat and sassy, they get prosperous, and then they forget the Lord. They start worshiping other gods, start doing other things, and then they get taken into captivity, they're vexed, they're in adversity, and then they come back to the Lord, and it's just this over and over and over again. And I believe what he's doing here is he's just reminding them of that. That, there was times where Israel was without the true God, and God vexed them for it, and then they got right with God. Right? And it's just this revolving door. But you need to be reminded of that, especially when you're in times of peace. When it comes to when I preach on certain subjects and you're like, well, is anybody dealing with this? No, but we don't want to deal with it, right? It's better to have a cautionary sermon of a rebuking type to just say, hey, we're not in this right now. We're not dealing with this, but let's not get there, okay? Let's not get comfortable. Let's not get fat and sassy to where we're like, well, we want all these people to Christ. Let's just take it easy. No, we need to keep pressing forward. We need to be strong and let not our hands be weak, because it says that our work shall be rewarded. And so we need to be constantly moving forward. And this is the kind of sermon I see coming from Azariah. And, and Asa is going to bite on it. And he goes even further from that. And we're going to see what he says here. He takes it to an extreme, to a really big extreme as far as following the Lord. To the point that if you're not following the Lord, you're going to be put to death. That's where he puts it, okay? Listen, the doors are open here, okay? If you don't want to follow the Lord, that is not our I'm not saying that necessarily what he commands here was like out of the mouth of God or anything like that, but he took it to an extreme, right? He's basically, okay, you tell me to seek the Lord? All right, anybody in our nation that doesn't seek the Lord, you're going to be put to death. And, that's extreme. That's an extreme stance, but you can just see his zeal for the Lord in that. Now, what's interesting about this passage, and I just noticed this when I was studying this out, is that in verse 1 there, notice what it says. It says, the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, the son of Oded. But then look at verse 8, because verse 8 is where we see Asa's response. It says in verse 8, and when Asa heard these words, and the prophecy of Oded the prophet, he took courage and put away the abominable idols out of all the land of Judah and Benjamin, and out of the cities which he had taken from Mount Ephraim, and renewed the altar of the Lord that was before the porch of the Lord. Now, there's a couple things here. I'm going to get to the Oded thing, but this could be the case where there was still some high places, still some idols, and they eventually got taken out. So 2 Chronicles is just stating that he eventually got rid of all of the high places, all of the idols, but it just didn't happen all at once at the beginning. Okay, but notice that it says Oded the prophet. it starts off saying that's Azariah, the son of Oded. Now, first of all, know this, that Oded, there's another Oded, okay? So there's an Oded that's like 175 years later when you're dealing with Ahaz, the king, which is Hezekiah's father, okay? So that's like 100 and some years, almost 200 years ahead that there's this other Oded, so don't get this confused with that Oded, because Oded's a very major character in the Bible. I'm just kidding. So you're like, who's Oded anyway? But all that to say is that there's two different Odeds. But this is an interesting thing where I saw this as far as the fact that in one place it says Azariah, the son of Oded, and then here it says Oded, the prophet. That's all I got. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to tell you my thoughts on this. It's interesting because this phrase, the sons of the prophets, is brought up in 2 Kings a lot, dealing with, like Elijah and Elisha, and it says, the sons of the prophets, the sons of the prophets. And this could be the thing. Basically, there was Oded the prophet who got this prophecy, and he sent his son to go tell the prophecy. Does that make sense? And because I'm just kind of trying to logic through this because I believe both's right. Oded prophesied this, and Azariah, his son, prophesied that. That's just what the Bible teaches there, right? But I believe Azariah, his son, was the person that was the feet on the ground giving the prophecy, right? It'd be kind of like if Oded saw the vision, God talked to him and said, here's the prophecy to give to Asa, right? And then he says, son Azariah, go and tell Asa this prophecy, right? That's legitimate. But it also kind of answers this sons of the prophets thing. It's like, what is this sons of the prophet? Why do you keep saying sons of the prophets, okay? And it could be this, that, you basically had prophets and then they would send their children like that were prophets as well. But they kind of sent them as the Aaron, the messengers, to go send off these messages. Because a lot of times you'll see that, one of the sons of the prophets came over and said this, and one of the sons of the prophets came over and said this. And this could be one of those cases where you had Oded the prophet, and then Azariah his son, which would be a son of the prophet, that went and actually told Asa this prophecy. Okay? And that's something that, I'm just going to be honest with you, and this is not the first time I've read through 2 Chronicles, but I never caught that. I never caught that in one place it says Azariah, the son of Oded, and then it was the prophecy of Oded, okay? And so just little things like that, people are going to be like, oh, it's a contradiction in the Bible, close it up, That's ridiculous, okay? Like I said, I think it's very clear that they both prophesied it, but it's probably the case that Oded got the prophecy from God, and he sent his son Azariah, and Azariah was filled with the Spirit, right? The Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied it to Asa, right? So it doesn't say that Oded, it just says that he heard these words in the prophecy of Oded the prophet. It doesn't say that Oded was there speaking to him, right? Azariah was there speaking to him, but it was the prophecy of Oded, okay? So anyway, you're like, who cares? No, I care about those type of things because those are the type of things that people will bring up. And when I'm reading through there, I constantly want to reconcile those type of things. And, I think that stuff's interesting anyway. But I just automatically thought of the sons of the prophets when I was thinking about that, because that's a phrase. You could probably preach a whole sermon on the sons of the prophets and be like, what is this talking about? Why does it keep saying, like, the sons of the prophets this, sons of the prophets that? I'll say this. They're not single men in a dormitory. It's not the school of the prophets, by the way. And that's what, these Bible colleges, they'll take that phrase, sons of the prophets, and be like, well, this is where they had dormitories, and it was all single men. Now, actually, when you see it, it's talking about, like, the wife of one of the sons of the prophets. So, that doesn't seem to mesh up with your dormitory, like single men rooming up together and all this other stuff. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. But Asa, he hearkened unto this. And like I said, this could be the case where, remember, he had 10 years of rest. Then he had this battle with Zerah, the Ethiopian. And then this prophecy comes to him, and then he's talking about, like, taking out, like, these abominable idols. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought all that was gone. Well, what I think is going on is at the beginning of 2 Chronicles, it's basically kind of telling you everything that he did at the very beginning before it even happened. Because actually it talks about how he took away Maacah, his mother, which would be like his grandmother, from being queen. Well, that doesn't happen until after he makes this vow here. So it's kind of like he tells you all this information up at front, and then you get into the details of when it happened, okay? Now, going on for verse 9 there, it says, And he gathered all Judah and Benjamin, and the strangers with them out of Ephraim and Manasseh, and out of Simeon, for they fell to him out of Israel in abundance when they saw that the Lord his God was with him. Now, that's interesting, too. Notice that, his zeal in following the Lord and adversity and all that had caused other people from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon to come down to him. Now, we know that with Rehoboam that the Levites all came in, right? The Levites left their suburbs and came down into that southern kingdom. And then there was other tribes that, from every tribe, there were people that came down. But with Asa, even more came in, right? And so they're just like, he has the true God. God is with him. We're going to follow him. So it's basically like this dispersion from the northern kingdom after this battle and just seeing that God was with them. Because Asa started reigning at the very end of Jeroboam's reign. If it was like in his 20th year, and Jeroboam reigned for 22 years. So basically, Asa was coming in at the tail end of Jeroboam, and he reigned for 41 years. So he reigned through a lot of the stuff as far as all the conspiracies that were going on up there. So you can imagine that Israel's in a mess, right? Because after Jeroboam dies, his son only reigns for 2 years, and then it's just like conspiracy after conspiracy after conspiracy. They burn down Tirzah, like all these things are going on. And you kind of just look at Asa down there as like this rock that's trusting in the Lord, and he's making this covenant with God. They're prosperous, they're in rest, they're not having any war. And you can just imagine people are just like, yeah, we're going down there, You need to get your house in order up here. So, but that just shows you that the stability of being someone that trusts in the Lord. You're not tossed to and fro. You're not into all these, problems that come with being against the Lord. And so, where was I at with that? I lost my place. Oh, yeah, verse 10. So they gathered themselves together in the 3rd month, in the 15th year of the reign of Asa. Okay, so now we know where we're at when this happens, right? So they had rest 10 years, but we don't know, again, was the first 5 years, when, he was kind of getting rid of the Sodomites, but he didn't get everything out. Then 10, that marker where he had rest for 10 years, that's when he got rid of all the high places. Again, I'm just trying to answer where in one place it says he didn't, and then in one other place it says he did. But in the 15th year of the reign of Asa is when this happened. And they offered unto the Lord the same time of the spoil which they had brought, 700 oxen and 7,000 sheep. So big offering here. Kind of reminds you of Solomon a little bit on like all the offerings that he did. It says that whosoever would not, in verse 12 there. And they entered into a covenant to seek the Lord God of their fathers with all their heart and with all their soul. That whosoever would not seek the Lord God of Israel should be put to death, whether small or great, whether man or woman. This is intense right here. And so this is they're taking this covenant, and I'm not exactly for this, meaning like this is intense. I'm not saying like taking the covenant is inherently sinful, but it's not exactly the smartest thing to do. Okay, that's why it says swear not at all, right? Because you don't know whether you're going to be able to perform these vows, all that stuff. So taking a vow or making this type of covenant where it's like, we're going to do this or die, I think you should, in essence, like say, hey, I'm going to serve the Lord till the day I die, do or die, right? That should be your mentality. But to sit down and say, God, I'm going to do this, and if I don't, kill me. It's like, good night. That's because we all make mistakes. And as soon as you do that, now you're kind of putting God against the wall to say, hey, you told me to do this, right? You made the covenant. And so, but it shows how serious Asa was, right? I mean, he loved the Lord, and he wanted to follow God. And, he's a great king. And so in verse 14 there it says, And they swore unto the Lord with a loud voice and with shouting and with trumpets and with cornets. And all Judah rejoiced at the oath, for they had sworn with all their heart and sought him with their whole desire, and he was found of them. And the Lord gave them rest round about. And also concerning Maacah, the mother of Asa the king, he removed her from being queen because she had made an idol in a grove. And Asa cut down her idol and stamped it and burnt it at the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away out of Israel. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was perfect all his days. So again, this high place is not being taken away. It says in Israel. So I don't know. Like I said, when you're dealing with these high places, are you dealing with, because they took out, you'll see in other places where they got some of the stuff up above with Baasha, and as far as Bethel and stuff like that. So I don't think it's in Judah. I think what it's basically stating is that Judah, they got rid of all those high places and all that stuff, but there just was some places they didn't get rid of those. But again, it can be the timeline of when he does it. But going on from there, in verse 18 it says, "And he brought into the house of God the things that his father had dedicated, and that he himself had dedicated, silver and gold and vessels, and there was no more war unto the 5th and 30th year of the reign of Asa." So really think about this reign, right? Because he reigns for 41 years. And he had rest for 10 years. Then at this 15-year mark, so at some point between that 10 years and this mark where they're going to have rest again, they had this battle with Zerah, right? The Ethiopian. I don't know how long that battle lasted or how long that went on for. But, they had one big war that God delivered them out of, and then rest for the rest. So he pretty much had rest for 35 of those years that he reigned, except for that one battle. And he only reigns for 41 years, so we're going to see as he goes on with his life here that he ends up making a mistake in the next year. So he had rest up to the 35th year of his reign, but then going on to chapter 16 there. So again, 14, 15, and 16 is all about Asa. And I'm just taking you step by step through this reign. So there's just some interesting things, but this is where he messes up. And what it comes down to is he tried to get rid of this problem without God. Okay, he didn't rely on the Lord like he did before. And in verse 1 there, it says, "In the 6th and 30th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah and built Ramah to the intent that he might let none go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa brought out silver and gold out of the treasures of the house of the Lord and of the king's house, and sent to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, There is a league between me and thee, as there was between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent thee silver and gold. Go break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. And Ben-Hadad hearkened unto King Asa, and sent the captains of his armies against the cities of Israel, and they smote Ijon and Dan and Abel-Maim, and all the store cities of Naphtali. And it came to pass, when Baasha heard it, that he left off building of Ramah, and let his work cease. Then Asa the king took all Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah, and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasha was building, and he built therewith Geba and Mizpah. And if you know what's going on here, is that basically Baasha is the king of Israel, and so Israel's up north, and then you have Judah that's down south. And Baasha is coming down, trying to take out Judah, and he's building this Ramah. Okay, so he's basically building this fortress-type city to basically be able to come into Judah. Well, what Asa does is he hires Syria, which is above, right, north of Israel, and has him come down and start taking out Dan and all those. So Dan, remember Dan's the most northern part of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. That's how I always remember, from Dan to Beersheba. So Dan's north, Beersheba's the southern portion, the most southern portion. And so basically he brings out this two-front battle. And so as he hears about this stuff in the north, Baasha has to go up there and deal with that, and he leaves off building, and that's where Judah comes in and takes over that whole area and deals with their fortress that they're trying to build there. So that's pretty much what happens there. And so you can see that he wasn't trusting in the Lord here. He was basically trying to deal with a foreign power to help him out here. And he's going to get rebuked for it. Okay? So remember, he got the sermon that was like the good exhortation, like keep up the good work. Well, when he's getting at, remember, he's down, at the 36th year of his reign, so he's getting kind of to the end of his life here, and to the end of his reign, and he's just kind of falling off the wagon. And it just seems like every king does this. Every good king just kind of falls off the wagon at the very end of it. But in verse 7 there, we're going to see the prophet coming. It says, and at that time, Hanani, the seer, came to Asa, king of Judah. Now, Hanani, the seer. Now, remember when we went through Saul, or talked about Saul, I think we were talking about this, that Samuel was called a seer. It says he's the seer here, but it says, in time past they called him a seer, but now the seer meant a prophet. Okay, so that's what that word means. You know, it says the seer, it's just saying Hananiah the prophet, okay? It's just another way of saying the same thing. But Hanani, this is interesting too, because Hanani's son is going to rebuke Asa's son. Okay, go to 2 Chronicles 19. I just want you to see this because it's just interesting how these prophets work, how the father will be prophesying against the one king, and then the prophet's son will be there to prophesy against that king's son, and it just kind of goes down the line with generation to generation. Jeremiah's father was there, prophesying against Judah before Jeremiah was there, and you just see this correlation of these prophets and their sons, the sons of the prophets. So, but in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 1, and we're going to get to this obviously with Jehoshaphat, but it says in verse 1, it says, Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem, and Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him, and said to King Jehoshaphat, shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord. So you see Jehu, the son of Hanani, rebuking Jehoshaphat, and then you see Hanani rebuking Asa, which is Jehoshaphat's father. Okay, so just kind of see. I just like seeing those correlations where you see, okay, there's Hanani. That's why he was brought up in the conversation there, because you could have just said Jehu the prophet came to him. So anyway, back in 2 Chronicles chapter 16, we see what he says. And so in verse 7 there it says, because thou hast relied on the king of Syria and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Lubims a huge host with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. Herein thou hast done foolishly, therefore from henceforth thou shalt have wars. So notice that it gives you a little more information too about God and just his thought process. We kind of already knew this from all the stories in the Bible, but his eyes are going to and fro to show himself strong, right? To show himself strong on the behalf of those whose heart is perfect, right? So that you just imagine this. God is just looking for the man that has his heart perfect toward him to show himself strong. That's what he's just searching for, just trying to find him. Trying to find those that are following God and that want to follow him and want to be strong in him and saying, let me show myself strong on that person. And so it's just interesting to see that God is not only just up there like hearing our prayers, but he's actually looking for it. He's on the offense, looking for someone that wants to rely on him and trust in him. And so we need to be like that. Now, Asa didn't like this, okay? So in verse 10 there, then Asa was wroth with the seer and put him in a prison house, for he was in a rage with him because of this thing. And Asa oppressed some of the people the same time. So Asa just kind of has his downfall at the end of his reign. And it's all because he just got his toes stepped on, right? He messed up. What he should have said, yeah, you're right. What was I thinking? But instead he gets mad at the messenger and throws him in the prison. Okay, so Asa, who's a fantastic king, this is the king that was saying, listen, let's seek God and follow him, and if you don't, you should be put to death. And then over here, he gets a weak moment where he's just like, I'm gonna get Syria to help me in this avenue, right? And then he gets mad at the prophet for pointing out the obvious and puts him in the prison. And he oppressed some of the people at the same time. So you can think that just because he got his toes stepped on, he took it out on the people of God, and when he should have just fessed up to the problem. And so you can imagine, this is the sermon you were looking for, right? The sermon where it says you messed up, now you're going to have wars the rest of your life. Because that's just the broken record of the kings, right? Is that they don't follow God, and he said, I would have given you rest, you would have been in prosperity, now you're going to have wars. No more rest. And so, it's just that broken record that happens with them. And it also shows you, too, that it doesn't matter how good of a king or how good you were in the past, it does not mean that you can't mess up and get into this pit of, God's punishment coming upon you. So you can't look at your past and be like, look at all the great things I did and all the stuff we did in the past. No, what are you doing right now? It talks about this in Ezekiel when it talks about the fact that, the righteous man in all his righteousness, but if he commits iniquity, he's going to die for that iniquity, meaning that it doesn't matter how much righteousness you did over here. If you do this wickedness over here, you're going to get punished for it. And so you need to be thinking about that as far as just being faithful unto the end. And I know we usually talk about that and be like, well, we're usually trying to tear down the whole endure unto the end, be faithful unto the end, because we're trying to tear down people that say you got to do that to be saved. That's not what we're talking about. Obviously, salvation is eternal life. You don't have to hold out faithful unto the end. You don't have to live a godly life to the end, or at all, for that matter, to go to heaven. But we should be thinking about the fact that we should be faithful unto death. And we need to be thinking about, I want to go out saying I was fighting to the very end for the Lord, and that's how I went out. I want to go out like this. And what happens with Asa at the end of his life is just kind of sad. He was this great king that did these great things. Then he messed up. He got mad at the seer. And he's going to have wars the rest of his reign. But then notice that he gets this disease in his feet. And so in verse 23 there, it says, the rest of all the acts of Asa and all his might and all that he did and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Nevertheless, I'm sorry, you're in a different chapter. So I'm reading 1 Kings chapter 15. You're probably like, where in the world are you at? So you're in 2 Chronicles 16. I want to read this. I'll read this in 1 Kings chapter 15, because it says, nevertheless, in the time of his old age, he was diseased in his feet. That's what it says in 1 Kings 15, verse 23. But go to 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 12. Sorry. Sometimes these things blend together as far as which book I'm in here. So in 2 Chronicles 16, verse 12, it says, and Asa, in the 39th year of his reign, was diseased in his feet. So notice that's his old age. He reigns 41 years, so he's at the last 2 years of his life when this starts happening. So the last 2 years of his reign, he has this disease in his feet. And going on from that, it says, until his disease was exceeding great, yet in his disease he sought not to the Lord, but to the physicians. And Asa slept with his fathers and died in the 41st year of his reign, and they buried him in his own sepulchres, which he had made for himself in the city of David, and laid him in the bed, which was filled with sweet odors and divers kinds of spices prepared by the apothecary's art, and they made a very great burning for him. Okay, so obviously, he was a great king, and even though he messed up in the end, he was still, by and large, a good king. And it doesn't say that he did evil in the sight of the Lord. It says his heart was perfect toward the Lord. Okay? Did he mess up with, not seeking the Lord and not relying on the Lord? Yes. Did he mess up by putting the seer in the prison house, because he was mad at him and all this stuff? Yes, he messed up there. Did he mess up not seeking the Lord to get his feet healed, right? Yes, but he didn't go after other gods. He didn't start seeking other gods or enchantments or anything like that. His heart was perfect to the Lord, just like David. David messed up too. He wasn't perfect in the sense of never messing up. He committed adultery. He had Uriah killed. He numbered the people when he shouldn't have numbered them, or he messed up in how he did it, right? And, all that stuff that David did. But ultimately, Asa was a good king that did right in the eyes of the Lord, and his heart was perfect before him. But he did at his old age. It's just interesting that once he stopped trusting in the Lord, he just stopped altogether. He's just like, I didn't trust in the Lord to take care of this problem with Baasha. And then it's just like, I got this disease in my feet. I'm just not going to try to get a hold of God about this. I'm just going to trust in these physicians, okay? Now, disclaimer here, I'm not against all physicians, okay? I'm not against doctors, like, all in general. But let's just face it, there's a lot of things that doctors can't. They're not miracle workers here, okay? They don't know everything. And actually, there's a lot of, sometimes you talk to the doctor and you're like, where did you come from? Did you go to American Express last night? Is that like how you got this job? And I'm talking about like Med Express. You go in there and they're like Googling stuff. I was like, I could have Googled that, I true story, okay? I had this vertigo problem where I was getting dizzy, and I literally, the room was spinning. I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk. And what it was is that my inner ear got inflamed from an infection, and like basically the fluid in your ear just wasn't flowing right, all this stuff, right? So really all I needed was, what they gave me eventually was like a steroid, which is what brings down inflammation, right? And took care of the problem, all that, right? So basically it was an infection. But I went to like the WVU Express or whatever it was, and they're like, I was telling them what the problem was, and they're just like, oh, that's interesting. They're like, I'm going to have to go look that up. Like, what are you looking it up on? It's like, oh, we Google. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, I could have done that. Like I looked on there. It said I had cancer and I was going to die. Like what? That's not going to change anything. So anyway, they didn't know what the problem was. They're like, you may never get it right. I'm like, I'm going to kill myself then, because there's no way I can live like that where I can't even stand up at all, right? So I'm telling you this story because those people knew nothing. And then I will go to like an actual doctor who knows what he's talking about. And they're like, yeah, I know exactly what this is, and they told me exactly what it was. But then you got this plethora of people that knew nothing about the problem, and they were just like throwing stuff on the wall to see if it would stick, right? And when I see of like physicians of no value, like Job talks about that, he says you're physicians of no value. I don't want you to throw out the baby with the bathwater, meaning like say, well, all doctors are horrible, they don't know anything, okay? But know this, that there are some that are dumb. There are some that were on the bottom of that totem pole when they got out of med school, and they don't know that much. Or they think they know a lot anyway. But all that to say is that, listen, there are things that I do believe that if you went to a doctor, they can help you out with. They can, take care of the problem. But there's some things that are out of their hands. It's just something that, they're not going to be able to fix. There's not a pill for everything, and there's not something that they even know what's going on. And this is where you really need to rely on the Lord. And I know this is hard, and it's easy for me to say and all that stuff because everybody has different issues that they're dealing with. But this is really where you need to trust the Lord. I want to go to Mark chapter 5, and there's some things where where it's just like Paul, where he had an infirmity and he besought the Lord thrice about this infirmity, and Jesus just said, my grace is sufficient for you, and he just had to deal with it. He just said, well, all right, in my weakness, I'm going to be strong in the Lord. And God, basically was using that infirmity on Paul to kind of keep him relying on the Lord. Because if you had everything, that you didn't have any struggles in your life, you didn't have any infirmities, you didn't have anything that you're dealing with, and you're on cloud nine at all times, you're going to end up not following the Lord. Because those type of things are what keep us in check. Those are the types of things that keep us on our knees and keep us praying to God, keep us trusting in the Lord. If I was a millionaire right now and I didn't need to work, that would be horrible. And I'm just saying, meaning that, the work. Where's my work ethic? I end up being a lazy bum that doesn't do anything and then just lives life or whatever. And so I'm not saying I want to be financially strapped at all times. Right? There's always extremes to that spectrum. But I want to be able to work a normal day, get money, be able to pay the bills, and not be like worried about my finances all the time. But I don't want to be rich either. Give me neither poverty nor riches, the Bible says. And so, but the same thing goes with infirmities, meaning that, sometimes sicknesses, I'll get sick and then I'll get better. I'm like, man, this feels fantastic. It's almost like this reminder of like how good it is to be healthy, and not be sick. And so, anyway, I'm kind of saying that because everybody's sick right now. No, not everybody, but, a lot of people deal with, especially around this time, everybody gets sick and all that stuff. I'm not against medicine. I'm not against doctors. And I preface that with certain types of medicine, right? But all that say is that there are physicians that don't know what they're talking about. They're of no value. And you really need to ultimately, in every case, be trusting in the Lord. And not just be like, well, I'm just going to go to this physician, they're going to help me, and I'm not going to seek the Lord in this. That's foolishness, okay? In Mark chapter 5, verse 25, it says, and a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, was nothing better, but rather grew worse. So get what happens here. This woman has this issue, and she's been going to physicians. She's spent every bit of her money on these physicians, and she's actually gotten worse. And then she comes to Jesus, right? And it says in verse 27, it says, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. Now, obviously, this is a miracle that happens here with Jesus. I'm not saying you pray to God and it's just going to take care of that disease or whatever. But let's not discount the fact that God still heals people and that God can still do this type of stuff. Meaning that if you want to trust in the Lord, this is where you need to be. Go to James chapter 5. Because James chapter 5 touches on this issue too when it comes to infirmities and sicknesses and stuff like that. And I do believe that this is more so dealing with things that are life-threatening, okay? Meaning that if you have a cold, we're not going to call the elders of the church together and anoint you with oil and say, please help Johnny's cough over here, okay? I believe we're dealing with a major thing. Like if someone found out they had cancer or someone found out they had some terminal disease that they need prayer over, then that's where we're getting into this realm. Does that make sense? Where this is a serious matter, and we really want God to get in there on it. That's not saying that you shouldn't pray for Johnny's cough, okay? Or, pray for these minor things too. But this case in James chapter 5, I believe, is dealing with serious matters, okay? And so in James 5, verse 13, it says, is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any merry? Let him sing psalms. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And so, if you're ever in that case where you just have this infirmity or you have this issue, don't be afraid to come up and say, hey, listen, I'd really like for James 5 to be the case. You say, do you really going to? Yeah, we'll use oil. I mean, that's what the Bible teaches here. And you're like, oh, we're getting Catholic here. No, that's what the Bible teaches, okay? I'm against stupid, Catholic things and stupid things with all that stuff. But listen, if the Bible explicitly says that you're going to take oil and anoint them and pray over them, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take oil and I'm going to pray over you and I'm going to do what the Bible says. But I don't believe this is like a blank check to say, well, whatever infirmity you have, he's going to heal you of it, because that would negate like Paul's circumstance, like where God said, my grace is sufficient, okay? But I would not take this out as far as this being something that would be, if you really want to get a hold of God. Obviously, prayer and fasting is a way to go with this. Because you may look at Asa and say, well, what could he have done to trust in the Lord and deal with this stuff? What could he have done? Well, there's a lot of things. He could have prayed. He could have fasted. He got a hold of God and seen if God would have taken care of it. I believe that if he delivered 1 million, that army of 1 million out of his hands, that he could have taken care of his feet too. And so, and listen, I'm not Benny Hinn up here. I'm not saying like, hey, listen, come up to me, we'll pray, and all your infirmities will be gone. What I'm saying is that let's not take away from what God can do. And if God forbears, then God forbears on it. All we can do is just ask. All we can do is do what he says that we should, He's got some options there, right? He says, hey, if you're sick or whatever, then come up to the elders of the church. And listen, I'm the pastor, right? There's no other elders. But if we were a big enough church where we had multiple pastors or whatever, or even deacons and stuff like that, then we could do that. But all I'm saying is that in the end, don't you want to say, hey, I've done everything God told me to do when it came to asking about this. It's in his hands, right? I prayed about it. I fasted about it. I even asked, I did what James chapter 5 says. And I'm talking about serious issues too, but, Brother Charles, hopefully you don't mind me saying, but, like Brother Charles had cancer. And I believe Pastor Huggins did that same thing. And, and he went to doctors. And he did therapy and all this other stuff, and it's in remission and all that stuff. And praise the Lord for that. But I will not take out the fact that God was in that. That what if Charles hadn't done that? Hadn't asked, Pastor Huggins to do that, would we be in that same case? I don't want to know. But yeah, I don't want to know like that it would have been different. And besides the fact of just knowing that that God was gracious in that. But what I'm saying with that is that you need to take advantage of all the opportunities. You kind of think of with Abijah, with the blowing the trumpets. What if they wouldn't have blown the trumpets and taken advantage of that promise that God said that, hey, the army's coming against you, blow those trumpets, and I'll come deliver you. What? They took advantage of it. If I was one of these kings, I'd be like, I'm going to start taking advantage of that, right? Where's the trumpets at? Give me the praise, blow those trumpets when the army's coming against me. And, it doesn't mean that there's this blank check to mean that God will definitely heal you, like I said. So I'm not up here, this prosperity Benny Hinn, like come up here, I'll like hit you in the head and like you're healed. But what I'm saying is that God has done it before. He can do it again. He's the same God that we see in this chapter dealing with Asa, that we see in James chapter 5. That is to the New Testament church, James chapter 5. And this isn't a whole sermon on that subject. It's just something that I was thinking about when I was dealing with when I was thinking about Asa and at the end of his life. And if he just would have sought the Lord, I don't know if that disease killed him, but I'll say this, I'm sure it didn't make the last 2 years of his life very pleasant. Okay? And so there's a lot to learn from Asa. We see his zeal for the Lord. We see how he was seeking the Lord. But there's definitely things to learn about the fact that, hey, you can start off strong and you can have a really good life when it comes to that, but why not do it to the end? Why not just be faithful unto the end? Why not just trust in the Lord to the end? And that's something that, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. And many generations have done this where they started off good. And I think of like the IFB movement and how they had this good push with their soul winning and doing all this stuff. And then it's just like at the end, they're just like, we're just going to give in to this stuff. It's like, why are you stopping now? And that's where another generation has to come up and be like, no, we're going to do what we should be doing and then starting off strong. But let us not be like that. Let us not fall off like that. Let us not compromise. Let us not just end our old age and be like, well, I've run my course. Time to get liberal. You know what I mean? It's like, why would you start at the end of your life to get liberal and all that when you're so close to the end? And I don't know, maybe Asa just didn't know when he was going to die, but if Asa knew he only had like 4 years left, then why wouldn't he have just been like, you know what, I'm just going to just keep trusting in the Lord till the very end. And, that's just the sad part when I see these kings. And I know they've been gone for a long time, but I read these stories and I'm just like, why couldn't you just hold off to the end? Why can't you be that one king that be like, that was the best king, there was nothing bad said about him. But it's just like every king, every good king, there's something that they do wrong. And it comes down to, obviously, no one's perfect. But, I just, that's what I want my life to be. I want it to be that I did it to the end, and I didn't just give up. I didn't stop trusting in the Lord and all that. And we need to just be reminded of that. So, but that's King Asa. He reigns for 41 years. So he's a big chunk of that time of Judah there. And he reigns all the way past into Ahab's reign. So like I said, he kind of goes through all these conspiracies and people being killed and all that stuff on the northern side. And he's kind of like that foundation down there. And then Jehoshaphat is going to be a good king too. So we have some good kings coming up, or at least that one. Then we're going to go through some bad ones, good ones, bad ones, good ones, bad ones. So, but anyway, let's end with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for today and thank you for the souls that were saved today. And Lord, just pray that you would be with us throughout this week. And Lord, with our work, help us to get everything we need to get done, especially as we're taking a retreat. Lord, just pray that you would be with us and be with us in our fellowship and time of leisure. Help it to be restoring or basically just a refreshing to just have this little vacation, and then we can hit the ground running again for another year there, here at Mountain Baptist Church. And just help us to always be trusting in you, to rely on you, to rest in you, and not to falter in that. And Lord, we love you and pray all in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.